Yay, we're live. Okay, as people keep joining, I'm just gonna kind of kill like 1 minute because I know there's a little bit of lag time. I have joined and feel like I missed the beginning of something, who's speaking and what the introduction was, because as great as Zoom is, there's just that little bit of time that it takes for everybody to kind of get signed in. So I'm gonna wait just a few more seconds before we officially start so that no one feels like they're missing the beginning, because there's a lot of good, interesting stuff to talk about, and I want to make sure everybody feels like they're fully in the loop. So we'll just kind of hang out a little bit together. And I see some people are already using the chat, which is amazing. Please feel free to keep using that and to use the question and answer as you have questions throughout the session. Okay, hopefully everyone has joined. I'm going to officially welcome everyone. This is our Fundraising via Supportive Individuals webinar. It's co-presented by American Composers Orchestra and American Composers Forum. My name is Lyndsay Werking. I am the acting president and director of development with American Composers Orchestra. I'll be moderating today, and I want to thank all of our panelists for being here. And I think to start out, I'm just going to have each of you kind of just give a brief introduction, your name, where you're based, and your connection to the arts. Nick, you want to go first?
Sure thing. So my name is Nick Phan, and I am a tenor. I'm a classical tenor. I sing classical music and opera. And I'm also the artistic director and co-founder of an organization that promotes art song in Chicago called Collaborative Arts Institute of Chicago, or CAIC.
Thank you for being here, Nick.
Thank you for having me.
Somi, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Somi Kakoma. I'm a vocalist, a writer, a playwright, and a performer. I'm thankful to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Dafnis, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, hi, everyone. My name is Dafnis Prieto. I'm a drummer, composer, and educator, and have my own label named Dafnis on Music, and that's it, more or less. I'm looking forward to join this conversation with all of you.
Great. Last but certainly not least, jump on in, Bonnie.
Great, thank you. I'm Bonnie Marshall. I'm calling in from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I am the VP of Development for the American Composers Forum. I'm a music fan, a curious listener, and a fundraising professional.
Yay. So I just want to set a little bit of context for this conversation, which is that when it comes to fundraising, there's lots of different places to look for money. There are grants you can get from foundations, from government sources. There is crowdfunding, and there is individual fundraising. We're deciding to really focus on individual fundraising today. So if you have questions about other types of fundraising, please let us know after the fact, and maybe we can plan a future panel. But for today, we really want to focus on this one piece, which is how do you find individuals who have money that want to, support art, and how do you get them to support your art? So that's really what we are focusing on with today's conversation. And to start, I really wanted to kind of first talk about fears and misconceptions that people have about fundraising. So Dafnis, Nick, and Somi, as the kind of artists on our panel, I'm wondering if you can share kind of the biggest fear or barrier that you had to overcome just in starting to think about asking people for money.
Somi, you want to go ahead?
Sure. I think the biggest fear is really choosing to understand that your work can be monetized. I mean, I think that you have to kind of get beyond how other people might value your work and decide the value of it for yourself. I think that that's probably the initial kind of hurdle or fear to get past. Yeah, you have to recognize the value, understand how culture is monetized in commerce. I mean, unfortunately, it sounds quite crude to talk about art and culture in that way in terms of money. But actually, in order to make the work, you need the funds to make the work and so forth. And so, and you need to be able to have a sustainable living, to make a sustainable living through the work. And that's just a part of it. So I think for me, that was the biggest challenge, being able to firstly recognize that it is a business. Secondly, to overcome the fear of, I think there's some kind of maybe even shame associated with having to ask people for that money. But if you think about what any business does, they actually have to get a certain type of investment capital or a certain type of business loans or things like that. So there's a kind of reorientation of how we think about how the business of making art, in this particular case, making music, sustains itself and therefore ourselves.
Yeah, in my case, I mean, it could be maybe a fear of rejection in a way. However, you know, regardless of whether I think I have something positive and of value to offer, rejection could be there. That is not something that it works all the time the same. Having a good product and having people interest. I think the idea of asking for money after, you know, I've educated myself to understand that that has been the kind of the trend since many years ago. I mean, we're talking about centuries. That's what Mozart did and what Beethoven did, and that's what many composers did in order to survive, and in order for the music to survive, and that's what they had to do. I mean, you know, the biggest scope here is about you have a dream and you want to share it with the world and you think it's a positive thing. So that afraidness of people not understanding or just the rejection of it, I think is the biggest obstacle, in a sense, the lack of understanding of where you're coming from. But everything else, you know, as on the way that you're fundraising, you're getting stronger in your beliefs, and obviously and hopefully many people or some people will come on board and be part and of that idea that you have, right?
How about you, Nick?
Yeah, for me, the biggest fear was really, I mean, I grew up in Michigan, so I have this sort of Midwestern idea about what's appropriate to bring up in conversation. And money is just not something I was taught was appropriate to discuss. And so I really had to kind of overcome that hurdle, this idea that I might offend somebody by talking about money or bringing up the subject of money or bringing up the subject of what it costs to make something. And that was a really big hurdle for me. And kind of just understanding that it actually can be okay. And there is a long history, as Dafnis just said, of artists doing this kind of thing and soliciting sponsorship of some sort of our work in order to, you know, as Somi just said, make a sustainable living doing what we do and creating it. So that's been a really big revolution in my thinking.
Yeah, so all the things I'm hearing you say are things that I've heard other people bring up and are definitely things that I myself have had to grapple with as a professional fundraiser. So, you know, getting over the fact that growing up, I was told not to talk about money. So getting over the taboo that now I talk about money with people on a regular basis is definitely a big culture and mindset shift. As an independent artist, shifting that you're not really asking for a handout, but that you're supporting what is your small business. And I think with something that can be more ethereal, like the arts, when there's not always, you know, a candle that you're selling on Etsy or something like that, you have to kind of really take ownership, like you said, Somi, like that your art has value and that it's okay to ask people to support that because you have bills to pay. And obviously, you can't just pay them by people, you know, applauding you. You need money to do that. Yeah, and then the idea of rejection, you know, it's scary anytime to face rejection, But I think especially when there's all these other things wrapped up into it, being afraid of someone, talking about something that you feel is taboo, you feel like you might be asking for, a favor that, is above and beyond, and then they say no. All of these things I think are perfectly normal fears and probably something that all of us deal with, but they should not be reasons to not do fundraising with individuals. Bonnie, I wanted to ask you, as a professional fundraiser who deals with all different types of fundraising, as you work with composers, what do you think are some of the kind of biggest misconceptions about what it means to do fundraising with individuals?
Right. I would say most artists come to me and they feel that. They feel the hesitation, they're a little intimidated, it's awkward. Like, how do you even ask a question? But the thing that I think, Lyndsay, you would agree with me as a professional fundraiser is that artists themselves are their most powerful fundraiser. We can't bring the magic, you're bringing the magic, And I think if you think more about making a presentation or making an ask, maybe think of it, just change the frame, and a little bit more of less asking for money and more of extending an invitation to be part of something amazing. Your individual donors should be your collaborators in what's going to happen, and bringing them along in the process so that they feel like they really are in relationship with you, and they're going to be helping support and be responsible for something amazing and a gift to so many different people. So, and I think you'll come across people who pretty much your realm of connection are going to be people who are really generous, people who care about culture.
Yeah, I like that idea. Collaborators instead of funders is, I think, a much more helpful way to think about it. And I will say, artists are a resource for professional fundraisers, that we're always, going to them, because you are the people that bring excitement into the room. And so even if you think that somehow we have answers about how to do things, more often than not, we're thinking about how can we put these really exciting artists who are really interesting people in the same room. And you can do that, every day with the work that you're doing. So you kind of already have all of the assets in your pocket with the art that you're doing. When we talk about individual fundraising, there's kind of phases, and the phases are identification, cultivation, solicitation, and stewardship. And those are standard fundraising words. We're going to talk about each of them and kind of what happens in each one. And I wanted to start with identification. So where do you find people to be part of your network? And I see in the chat that, someone has already said that their biggest obstacle is that they feel that their friends and family are not necessarily fans of contemporary classical music. So they don't feel like the right people for support. And, that is a good place to start as well. It's not going to be helpful for you to keep chasing after people who are not interested in what you're doing. So it's good to segment your network into they might come to a concert because they care about me, but they're probably not going to become a supporter. So I'm curious to the panel, where have you found people and where do you meet them? And how do you kind of keep track of them as you're doing your artwork?
Should I jump in? Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead, jump in.
So for me, a lot of the people that I've met in my network actually has been working for other companies, or, when I'm working for an opera company in particular, it's not uncommon for me, as Bonnie was just describing, to be trotted out to kind of, mingle with donors and kind of engage with them. And for a long time, as a young artist, I was thinking, oh, this is just part of my job, and this is part of my job working for a larger company. But over time, I've developed friendships with some of those people, and I've been fortunate enough to develop friendships with some of those people. And when I started trying to fundraise for my own projects, I had a couple of friends point out to me, you actually are really already well connected to people who give to the arts and who are inclined to give to the arts and who are inclined to give to work that you're involved with already, because that's what they're doing already. So that might be a great place to start. So that's actually been a really valuable resource for me. And again, it's been a shift in thinking. It's sort of been a shift in thinking from, oh, this is part of my job for a larger, as my job at an opera company or as a guest artist somewhere. And instead also thinking always like, how can I continue to maximize this opportunity?
So kind of taking something that feels like an obligation and a requirement of your employment with that company to being something that you can leverage in the future by continuing to build those relationships yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the thing that has been I felt kind of strange about that when I was in my early 20s and kind of doing this as a young artist and not understanding exactly what was happening. But I feel like the greatest benefit actually of that is that I've met some of the most interesting people who have become really wonderful friends over time. And so it's kind of, I'm glad that my mind has been opened in that way, because it's opened my eyes to just meeting people from all walks of life in different ways.
So Nick has found them through kind of, his regular engagements with opera companies. Composers sometimes are a little bit more hidden in the process. And so Dafnis and Somi, I'm curious about ways that you may have found people either through independent gigs that you've planned or your website, or where are other places that you are kind of identifying people who might be supporters?
Well, I mean, I think if you don't mind me jumping in, Dafnis, I'm sorry. I think that initially, when you are part of, whether it's any kind of fellowship or those are sort of my initial, I would say my experience, I was a TED Fellow, or I am a TED Fellow, ended up kind of connecting me to this larger community of high net worth individuals, people who are interested in ideas, culture, technology, science, who are curious people. So I think that kind of allowed me to connect to, it also allowed me to showcase my own work or talk about the work that I'm doing, and invited a certain type of interest. So when you kind of align yourself with an institution that is all about bringing more visibility to emerging voices or thinkers or, creatives, scientists, whomever, people who are doing a range of things in that particular instance. But I would say when you align yourself with those type of institutions, then that already kind of plugs you in to a network that you don't actually have to do the heavy lift of finding that network yourself, if you will, because they kind of are availed to you. I'll say that the other side that also kind of reminds me of is there are funding opportunities that are not about necessarily going to an individual per se. That can be a very critical part of your fundraising efforts, right? So there are a lot of grants that are available for composers that are in the world. And I find that if you kind of plug into those opportunities, that also kind of opens up another network. And if you continue to establish relationships with those organizations or institutions that are offering those grants, then you'll find that network is also expanding. And you can also pick the brain of a development person or program officers or people like that about like other types of funding. The other thing I would say that's important to have in place is a fiscal sponsorship, because so many artists will be they're not eligible for certain types of grants or larger grants where you don't have that kind of accountability on a fiscal level, and they will only give it to you through a program. I've been with Fractured Atlas for many, many years. It's the largest and oldest, I think, artist fiscal sponsorship program in the country. And they're great. Everybody, I mean, there are a ton of them that you can look into. I'm just sort of shouting them out because that's what I've used. But there are also a range. So I encourage that as well as an initial way of asking, right? Because those particular application processes require that you get very clear about your idea, very clear about how to articulate those ideas specifically for the request of money and resources. And then you can kind of take that knowledge and take that language even and direct it to individual donors if that's the focus. But I think that those kind of smaller steps along the way allow you to get used to that language, allow you to kind of also kind of cultivate this larger network. And again, as Nicholas said, traveling as a touring musician, I'm constantly meeting all kinds of people. And I think there's a way that there are people who will present themselves, or I've had the good fortune, I think, of having people who will present themselves to say, I'm really interested in knowing more about the work and how I can be supportive. And I think to really take note of who those people are and to really be intentional about sustaining relationships or keeping them abreast, even not even like, hey, here's something you could send me money for, but just like keeping them abreast of the goings on and then hope and seeing what manifests.
Yeah, so much good stuff in here. So I want to just clarify in case anyone isn't familiar with the idea of fiscal sponsorship. That's when you have another organization who has nonprofit status basically sponsor you so that you as an individual qualify for the benefits of being a nonprofit, which namely from a fundraising standpoint is tax deductibility of gifts that are made to you. But as Somi pointed out, there are lots of grants and fellowships where they may require you to be fiscally sponsored in order to apply. So I see that we put in the chat, ACF also offers fiscal sponsorship. And that process, I think, is a great, first step in clarifying like what is your mission as an artist and what is kind of the thing that you are pushing out there that is distinguishing yourself from, other people in the field. The other thing that you talked about, Somi, is kind of talking to connectors as well. And so I think sometimes people think, oh, I have to find someone of really high net worth. And I think actually what you can do is just start with like, who do I know who's interested in what I'm doing? And then go and talk to them and say, I'm working on this project and I want to find people who might be supportive of it. Do you have any suggestions? And that's kind of a tried and true technique that professional fundraisers use all the time. And it's also a really good way to get someone who may be a potential donor even more interested because you're asking them to kind of buy into your process. And Dafnis, I remember you talking a little bit about kind of using your producer for one of your albums in this way.
Yes. Well, yeah. Let me just, before I get to that, I just want to say, someone that mentioned there in my circle of friends and family, then mostly, yeah, I mean, in my case, I don't have necessarily a huge family here. I'm from Cuba originally, so I don't count with my family to support any of my projects. Forget about that. And then the next thing is, the fans, most of them, they're fans, but they, they have a low budget in their life. So you would not really ask, for big support, ideas. However, that doesn't mean that you're not shared that with them, because I really appreciate that you mentioned it already. I think it's a link attached to another link and to another link and to another link. And we, in this case, I was fortunate to have a partnership and have a really good relationship with Eric Oberstein, who became my producer in 2 albums ago. And that was a big band project, which it was, we had to raise, a lot of money. And he actually helped me out to connect with people and to kind of see myself from outside, which is another very important point of view. We as artists, most of the time, we see ourselves obviously from the inside out, but we need someone else to see ourselves from outside in to kind of see what people, might like of you and so on, right? So that was a very important, and through us, creating a team and trying to target, in this case, not only our fans, which we had already, and we're getting data for that, out through our mailing list and the media and stuff like that. There are even donors that they don't like to be publicly acknowledged, in a sense of putting a picture of him or putting even his name in capital letters. They just, in a way, they just want to do it as much discreet as possible, even though they might be giving you, the biggest sum of all, right? So it's a very wavy situation when it comes to that. Through my relationship with Eric, we have get to know people that have really helped us out in a big way to make really important steps. And
Someone asked a question that it's kind of touching on fundraising, which I don't want to spend too much time on, but I want to clarify what we're talking about. So the question is thoughts on Facebook fundraisers versus old school platforms like Indiegogo. I feel like there has been so much noise on Facebook lately that people are burned out considering using Instagram for some upcoming online fundraisers. So this is a really helpful thing, I think, to distinguish, which is that crowdfunding can be really great if you are looking to kind of finish fundraising for a project and you really want to give all of your supporters a chance to like buy in for $10 or $25. When it comes to the kind of individual fundraising that we're talking about now, I really urge people to think about identifying 2 or 3 people who are going to be your core supporters. When we do any kind of individual fundraising, there's kind of like an upside down pyramid, which is that the largest group of money really comes from a small number of people. And so I don't want anyone to feel like we're saying you need to have a group of 10 or 20 donors who are giving you money that you're, in touch with all the time. I think as we go through this conversation, it'll become more clear that a lot of the people on this panel have 2 or 3 core supporters who they really keep a good relationship with. And then the benefit is you can go back to them. And so when we're talking about this kind of fundraising, it is kind of building your network of community, but also identifying like who are going to be the 2 or 3 people that you really focus on as being kind of your patron, which is how art used to be funded all the time. Bonnie, I'm curious from your point of view, what are some of the tools that you recommend that artists use to make sure that they're A, getting the contact information of these people, and B, organizing it and, staying in touch as time passes from that initial meeting?
I always like to reference Stephen Paulus, who was one of our co-founders at the Composers Forum, a very prolific choral composer. And this is really old school too. This is like, off platform, really, in that you're gonna, maybe some of your touch points are gonna be kind of brief, and it might be someone that you meet after a premiere, at a reception, and things like that. So I think it's really important to try to ask people, hey, can I get your name and email? I'd like to tell you what I'm doing next or where I'm going to be next. And, that's a very, very immediate, small place to begin. And what Stephen Paulus would do is if somebody became engaged in his work and he was lucky enough to gain some support for a project or a commission for him, he would take them to the next level. So if the next project involved some rehearsal time with an ensemble, bringing them into the process turned out to be really effective. And that's how you get that kind of like overlap, through time. And I think also another reason to think old school is face-to-face relationships are really meaningful and have a huge impact. And you could spend a lot of time developing all your online content and using these platforms. And you might only get like an 1/8 of what you might get in a coffee meeting, right? So that costs you what, $5 and an hour of your time to build a relationship that way. So I'm a huge proponent of old school. I'm also a huge proponent of how do you bring people along to the project. I'm all about the handwritten thank you note. How great would that be, especially when we're all at home right now, to get a customized handwritten thing from an artist is a treasure. And this costs you the price of a stamp.
Yeah, so you kind of segued into the next phase of fundraising is like once you've identified people, then you start cultivating them. And cultivating kind of sounds maybe a little clinical or like you're growing a plant or something. Maybe a better way to think about it is building a relationship. And I've heard people say collaborator, I've heard people say friendship. And so I kind of challenge anyone who's tuning into this webinar to really maybe, reassess some of the assumptions of what you think you're doing when you're meeting these people and then kind of bringing them along. And so I'm curious from the panelists, how do you think about what that building of the relationship is, and what are the steps that you take? It sounds like Bonnie kind of advocates for a coffee meeting. I very much agree with that I think that is a great first step. And I would even say at this moment now, you might say, well, everybody's, trying to stay away from each other. I can't do coffee meetings. You can plan a Zoom or a phone call with people. And that is another, that's giving them an outlet to something that they don't have access to right now anyway. So I'm curious, what have you done in the past, and what are you doing now that we're all kind of a little bit more isolated in our own silos? Somi, did you want to jump in? It looked like you unmuted.
Well, I mean, I think that first of all, I'm not so great at that. I'll just say I'm not the best at really leaning into those relationships. As by leaning in, I just mean like really developing, nurturing them, cultivating. I feel like I'm not as intentional as I should be. But I think the most important thing that out of the experience that I have had, where some people who funded my work have become very dear friends and kind of patrons, of the work. I think that it's important that you reach out to people as human beings, like not just, hi, I need something. I think it's just really important that you just, send a holiday card or a birthday greeting or I don't know, like whatever it is that you feel comfortable doing, just something that is like, I have this personal relationship, because money is quite personal. As Nicholas mentioned earlier, it's something that we're not all raised to just really talk about it or ask for it, or and it is very personal to a lot of people, to most people. And I think that there's an intimacy that should be established in a way that isn't like full of subterfuge. It's not this shady effort. It's like, I'm here to really get to know this person because they're taking the time to know the most personal part of myself. I'm an artist. Therefore, for them to really listen in that way and invest in that way, that means they are bearing witness to my essence, to the deepest part of myself, right? And so the very least one can do is take the time to try to get to know who that person is as well. And, ask about their family. I don't know. Where are they hanging out for COVID? I don't know. But like, that's You're
hitting on something really important, which I almost forgot to mention, but like, it's so great, which is that, part of building these relationships is not showing up and just pitching yourself and being like, this is what I'm doing, and this is what I have coming up next, and this is where I went to school. Actually, the most important thing to do is to listen and to really kind of ask more about them, so that you learn, what is it that, gets them interested and excited about life, and then kind of tying that into what you're doing. So I don't want to overlook that, anytime I go on a fundraising meeting, I try and spend 75 to 80% of it asking questions that allow me to spend most of it listening. So I'm curious from Dafnis and Nick, what other ways have you found are useful to kind of build relationships with people?
Well, Nick, I'm gonna jump on in for a second. Well, in my case, I actually try to be as much inclusive in the sense of asking that person, what do you think? How do you view this? I asked him what is the way you see this? Because, as an artist, again, I see things from this side of the world, and I'm really curious to know, regardless of where I'm aiming or not to seek for any funding or not, even if I don't have anything in the back of my mind as an agenda, to know what people think about it from a different perspective, because that might give me actually a complete different perspective of my own work, which is an amazing way of looking at it just by having a conversation as such. I like to be inclusive, like, for example, the previous fundraising that we did a couple of years ago, we met a few, more important donors or supporters, and on this one that we're working right now, we're actually having Zoom calls, and I'm sharing with them. I'm sharing with them what they're going to be listening. For example, if it's a recording session or if it's a performance, even beforehand, and I ask them what they think, what it makes you feel that song, what it makes you feel that lyrics, what it makes you feel this melody. What is, I mean, I treat them as if they were my friends, because you never, I mean, what you only know about friends, the ones that you know from the past. You don't know the friends that you're going to have in the future. And regardless of whether they have the money or not, I'd rather keep, that integrity of a kind of a very empathic and very respectful and open kind of bridge between our conversation. So in this case, for example, I approach it. We've been approaching it that way in Zoom meetings, and we've been sharing the things, and even we go back and forth in terms of negotiation, because somebody's giving us the bulk of that um, you know support, and we ask it, what do you think about this amount, and how do you could you help us out to put this thing together, and that way they feel much more inclusive into the because there are two things: is the process, the enjoyment of the process, and then the final results. So I think it's important to be inclusive, to include this person as part of the two. That's my.
Yeah, I think that's really important, that you want them to be part of the journey, and so that they feel like they have ownership and buy-in, and it's not just about experiencing the final product.
Yes.
Nick, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to second this idea of just taking time to spend time with people and check in with people. And I mean, it's in many ways, because of this moment, like, it's made me much less afraid to kind of write an email to somebody and engage that way, or just say, hey, like, let's have a Zoom. And I live in San Francisco, and the organization in Chicago which I do a lot of fundraising for, that's far away. And normally an impediment to me, my work there, is that I'm just not physically present. And so I get shy because I can't do the $5 coffee because I'm just physically not there. But in this moment where we're all just kind of embracing the magic of technology, it's made me much less afraid to just reach out and say, hey, let's catch up over a Zoom. And I've actually gotten a lot more, strangely, a lot more quality time with a lot of our board members in Chicago as a result. And conversely, because I'm touring so much under normal circumstances, I can't catch up with my contacts here. And so there was one instance just a couple months ago where there's a friend of mine who was actually really interested in supporting commissions of new works, and supported a commission that we had a couple of years ago. We've been trying to connect for 2-3 years to get together for dinner, and we finally, because we're all trapped at home right now, actually had the time to do that. So I keep trying to maximize this moment for, even though it's so difficult, for what the silver linings it offers in that way. And like Dafnis was saying, one of the fascinating things about spending time with people who seem like they might be potentially donors, or people who are already donors and supporters of the work, it is, the more you talk to them, the more you really understand what it is that they want to support. And that is so exciting, because it really brings them along as co-producers in a way. And some people really want to feel that excitement of that ownership over the project, necessarily, like that involvement and that feeling of being a producer. And others, they just want to support it, and they want to support me, or they want to support you, and they're happy to just kind of go there with that.
Yeah, I really like that framing too, where it's it's not necessarily that you're just asking for something, but you're providing something to people who really want this kind of connection in the world, and they want to do this kind of good in the world. And so that's another, I think, helpful framing to say, I'm not just asking someone to do something for me, I'm actually giving them something that they can't get anywhere else. And in that way, that's where it kind of is more of a relationship. Instead of just taking, you are giving them something in return. We did have a couple of questions that popped up here. Amy was saying that she always thought it would be less good to rely on only 2 to 3 individual donors because their support might be limited or exhausted after one main project. And this is in contrast to what I said. And I think, you do want to be mindful about donor fatigue, and that, if someone has made a big gift, you probably want that gift to not be asked for renewal. You might want to wait a year or something, but if you really thank them and make them feel like they were such an integral process, of course you can go back to people and ask them for money again. And I'm curious from, people on the call, like, does that kind of ring true for what your experience has been, with each project? Are you finding a totally new group of donors, or are you finding that you have kind of a group of people who are invested in your vision and they kind of follow you as you go through different projects?
So in my experience, I've actually had both. And for me, it's interesting because the value of the crowdfunding campaigns to support, I've run a bunch of crowdfunding campaigns, both to support some of the work in Chicago, but also to support, I've self-funded and self-produced something like 6 albums, solo albums. And so soliciting the funding through that, I've obviously relied on crowdfunding campaigns for most of those. And what has been interesting is that when I look at like I've always relied on sort of 2 or 3 donors to kind of, like, as we've been talking about, sort of be the core supporters of this work. And many times they've been really key and pivotal, and they've stayed with it for more than one project or for multiple projects. And in some cases they did get exhausted, not necessarily emotionally, but just financially. Like, they just weren't able to continue to give it the same capacity that they were previously, but that didn't mean that they didn't support the work in a continued way, just maybe not in the same fashion and at the same amount. But what's really interesting to me is that I've always noticed that as one falls away, another one sort of comes in. And part of that is by maintaining this contact with this larger group of donors that has always been there for the most part along the way for each of these projects, perhaps at smaller levels. And so I feel like the answer in a way is both yes and
so don't be afraid to ask people again, but also it is smart to keep, renewing as you go along and not assume that those people will be there. So I think there is a delicate balance of, not wanting someone to feel like you're only relying on them, because people also do like to feel like they're part of a team. Dafnis, I know that you've kind of successfully fundraised for successive albums, and I'm curious, from the first one that you did to, second and third, like what have you found in kind of creating a group of people who follow you?
Yeah, I mean, for that, the most bigger project, which was a big band album that we did like 3 years ago, or something like that. We did both. The crowdfunding was actually through our website. We did everything ourselves. We didn't go into any of these platforms. We did it ourselves, and a lot of people also were part of it with different rates of what are we going to give back to them. Like, maybe for just $5 more, they already insuring to get a copy of the record signed by me for extra $5 that they're going to buy it anyway when it comes out. And I guess, I send a postcard sign or something, or thank you notes and things like that, right? So that's the majority, which is, in a way, people that are not able to support you as much as you might need. And then you have these small numbers of people who have, it becomes the bigger supporters. And, for them, basically, we have made actually teachers, we have made, as part of the project, and we send them to whatever they need at that moment after we make it, because they really trust us. And that trust that they give into us, we want to show it back so that we can keep, and first of all, that we can tell them with actions, and, we appreciate what you have done, and you are part of this team. Now, this is really interesting because this latest project that we're actually working on now, this is an idea who at the beginning came out of one of the donors. He say, you guys, you should do this specific thing. This is going to be great. I think it's, you guys, and we thought about it. It's like, yeah, I've been kind of thinking about that, but it's so a huge thing that it never really came in my mind. So in a way, now the whole thing has come back, and in a way, we're feeding this person's fantasy in real, because it's not that I'm pleasing him through me now. So it's kind of and it's a really kind of a retroactive, or a two-way thing at this moment. And that's just my experience. I don't know what is going to come up in 5 years from now, but I can only tell you for so far the experience that I've had in that regard.
That kind of comes back to the idea of collaborator that we were talking about.
Yeah.
Is that by continuing that conversation, they brought up an idea, and probably one of the biggest barriers you had imagined was that it was a very large project that you thought would cost a lot.
Yeah, I just think that I want to add something, because at the beginning I made what is it, like my first 6 records. This was just swiping my credit card. I didn't ask for any money to anyone. I made my own label. I did everything myself. I swiped my credit card. I went to my bank and I asked for a loan. I did everything. That is not really what I'm looking for now. I don't, when I look at these people, I don't think about this is a bank ATM machine guy or girl, whatever it is, right? So I'm really looking for an honest relationship that will last. Honest relationship lasts. And what I'm saying is that even if that person say, listen, I'm right now I'm broke, I say, okay, great. Here's my address. Come to my house. You can come and live with me, right? Is so, because that should be above, all the platform in terms of the the money situation,
So that the relationship, regardless of whether the person can.
Yeah, that person can come back to me
Yeah.
and say, I cannot support you, and I say, no worries at all. But that person at the same time might give you a hint of who can.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
So the relationship is even much more important than even everything else. At least in my experience, that's what.
Yeah. Bonnie, I want to talk a little bit about when we ask for money. Someone actually, there's 2 parts to my question. Someone actually asked about donor advised funds. So I'm wondering if you can kind of speak a little bit about what that means and how much individual artists should think about those. But also, when it comes to asking for money, what your advice would be as far as what to have prepared beforehand so that you're really setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, first off, I just think it's great the artists on this panel are really talking about real, authentic relationships, which I think is just really what it's all about. Donor advised funds are usually funds that are managed by community foundations, where an individual can kind of have a pool of funds that they can legally only suggest that the foundation make a gift to XYZ. So it's not exactly a direct relationship. Think of it more as a vehicle, or in a way, kind of a managed bank account. And the same might be with the other question that came up on the chat. The same might also be for a family foundation. They might have that entity set up, and there's reasons why, for tax reasons and all of this stuff that you don't need to get into, but that's just basically, they might write a direct check. You might get something from a donor advised fund from a community foundation, or you might get something from a foundation. Each of those might have a different approach. So if you're working with a donor, you don't know what they have, how they do it, right? So you might ask them, if you find out they have a foundation or a donor advised fund, you say, well, what else would you need from me to activate a gift? Do I need to send a letter? Is there a formal proposal that I should submit for the rest of your family to review? So those are kind of just the logistical matters. And I'm sure Lyndsay and I would be happy to help you with any of those questions. And then part 2 of the question, right, was how do you do it? And I think relating back to the authenticity that we were talking about, and also what Somi was talking about, like sometimes getting that grant proposal ready, it's like you had to create the language around know what your project is and why it's important and really kind of own that. Another part of that equation is the equation. How much is it going to cost to do the project fully loaded, not halfway, because that's not going to get you the recording or the performance or the premiere or be able to pay your musicians and so forth. So really, really know what money you need. It's not good to ask for money and let it be open-ended, because then it just puts it on the donor to figure out, like, I don't know, are they expecting $500 or $5,000? What do they need to make this awesome thing happen? So one of the ways I like to look at that, say your project's $15,000, don't go out there asking for two, because that's just going to frustrate you and the donor, because they never got to see the thing fulfilled, right? So if you take your budget of 15,000, think about how you would break it down. Like, do you think maybe you could raise 2,000 through your crowdsourcing? Could I have enough individuals that maybe I could have a coffee meeting with 3 people at 5,000? And you can say that. You can say, at my project, here's the cost of my project. I'm really looking for 3 people or 3 individuals to step up at the $5,000 range, and that gets this cool thing to happen. I'd love to have you guys over for the rehearsal. The other thing that I've coached artists to do, coffee meeting can be scary, right? And saying a number out loud is, sometimes having just a 1-sheet draft of maybe the timeline and the costs. You could even have tiers. You'd be like, I can expect 2,000 to come in from crowdsourcing, and I'm looking for 3 individuals at 5. Even just being able to reference something on paper, first, it just creates a little bit more formality, but it also kind of helps ease the pressure or balance out the saying the number thing. And I also would just recommend that you're asking, you want to work with what feels most comfortable for you. And if you need a rehearsal for the coffee meeting, that makes complete sense. But I have to tell you that the folks that I have coached who have gone into the meeting, they knew that someone had capacity. They knew that somebody would be interested. And they got a little bolstered. They had some things written down. It took about 7 minutes, and they couldn't believe it happened. So always go into any conversation believing that good things can happen. And as far as the rejection thing goes, it might not be the right time. It might be more than they can do right now. It might be, come talk to me in the spring. It might be, hey, I'm able to do this, but you should meet is this other person. So I have rarely have I found that no means no. It usually means there's more of a process that needs to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe sometimes people think about fundraising and they don't want to seem greedy. And so they might, think like, well, how much would I be comfortable asking this person for? And, you don't want to kind of put limits on yourself. If something is going to cost $15,000, telling that person up front also brings them in as a partner to making that goal happen. And another strategy that I like to use sometimes is kind of preface a meeting with an email that at least sets the stage, not that says, I'm going to be asking you for money, but saying, I have this really specific project that I'd really like to talk to you about. We're looking for supporters, and now seems like a really good time to kind of bring you into the loop so that it's not really a surprise, because chances are most of these people know that you might ask them for money at some point. Somi, you had a really great short story that you shared with me about you had a project where you kind of had a funding shortfall, and then you were able to kind of successfully approach someone who had been a long time kind of advisor and friend to you. And I'm wondering if you might share a little bit about that experience.
Well, share a little bit. I mean, basically, I was meant to do a huge festival tour in Europe a couple of years ago, and my label at the time had agreed to a certain amount of tour support which, you know, I believed them. It was a major label, and, you know, I believed them. Anyway, so at the last minute, they said, you know, we've decided we want to put those funds towards your next project, the next recording, instead of additional tour support. And the problem was that it was like, they gave me that news about a week before I was leaving. And after they had originally said they were doing it, and it's kind of kept left me in the lurch, which is just another, you know, Dafnis, I love that you have your own label. It's an important thing, I think, especially in this day and age, for everybody to lean into like agency independence, all of that. I'm no longer there. But anyway, so, but they left me basically in a situation where I had actually applied for a grant, a travel grant. Mid-Atlantic has something specifically for American artists who are touring abroad.
Foundation, yeah. Mid-Atlantic.
Yes. And I think that's called US International. And so I happened to have that, but I had a little bit of a shortfall. And I basically was about to throw in, like, I was so frustrated with the act, with that moment that the label would do that. This is somebody who is clearly identified as somebody who's supposed to be an ally, a partner, right? I was so frustrated, and I remember sitting in my apartment in Harlem and being like, "This is it, I'm done." Like I was like, I'm moving back to the Midwest. I'm gonna just do something else, you know. But which is just, you know, we have these moments of where doubt completely can consume you, and it was particularly devastating because what the visibility of those festivals was meant to grant my career at the time. And so I just sent one email to this person who had repeatedly said, let me know, you know, how things are going, or if there's anything I can do to support. And not like if you need a check, but like, how can I support, you know? I just sent this person an email and said, this is what's happened. This is the shortfall. You know, I'm asking, I'm putting it out there because, you know, you told me to let you know. And I actually, this is a moment that I do need support. And, you know, they called me and they resolved it. In fact, they told me to keep the grant money and that they would cover all of it. So it was, you know, it's humbling that, first of all, you don't really realize who's waiting to support you and how they want to support you. Because I wasn't even like, the fact that he was like, keep that, right, is so generous. And so it wasn't lost on me, you know. That's what I can say. It's just the idea that, again, as Bonnie was saying, you don't want to ask for some small amount if you really, because the number sounds huge. If your project is 20 grand and you're asking for like 2,000 because you think it sounds too large, just, this is the project, that maybe this is what you have done, or this is what you're willing to invest, or this whatever. And the other thing I want to add to the idea of like a no, you know, just when people say no, it really isn't the end. It actually might be the end with that person. I'm fine with that. I think rejection is part of this journey as artists. You have to be able to stomach that, and you have to understand that it doesn't mean like nobody, right? Like somebody out there is interested and willing. And I think another note I just want to make, sort of separate to this, is that, and I kind of answered this, I tried to answer it in the Q&A about family foundations and approaching them. You know, it's important that we also think a lot about like, what is the work that's inspiring what are the issues that are inspiring the work that we're doing, right? Because I've also found some funding and support through kind of non-traditional arts spaces. Like, you know, my last record was a song cycle about the African immigrant community in Harlem. And so a lot of immigration focused funding was available to some of the projects I was doing around that record, around touring that music, around creating workshops that engage artists and immigrant community activists, and figuring out a way to kind of present dialogue about, you know, what does this music mean and how does it really translate into the real world? So I think it's also important to kind of think about these other kind of larger or even perhaps meta narratives that are around the work that you're creating, and then think about like, I don't know if somebody's composed some piece, an opera about the environment, like who are the environment focused organizations that might be interested in this piece, you know? And you'd be really surprised. You'd be really surprised. Anyway, I feel like I could continue, but I'll stop there.
No, but I love that, because the person had, I think that's another like lesson, is that if someone is saying, you know, let me know what's going on, or let me know if I can be helpful, I think sometimes we can feel like, oh, they're just being polite. But in my experience, usually people only say that if they mean it. So don't ignore it when people say that. We had a really great question that came in about creating a project budget. And this is particularly applicable to composers, which is that this person said, you know, when creating a project budget, do you also put in the money that you need to live, or should you only be asking for money needed to pay venues, musicians, and equipment? And of course, your project budget should include a commission fee for yourself if you are creating something new and original. I think composers especially sometimes are expected to arrive with something wholly created and ready to go, and they just have to fundraise to have other people make it come alive for them. I don't think you should shy away from saying, you know, this work is going to take me X amount of hours to create, which is X amount of weeks or months. Here's what it takes me to pay my bills for this month. So if I were really going to dedicate myself to this project, I need $5,000 or I need $15,000. And it's not that you're saying that you need that money, you know, all at once. You can say, I need $15,000 because it's going to take me this many months to do this project. But I think that goes back to what we were talking about with, you know, valuing your art and not being ashamed that you're asking to be paid for it. And I think that is an area where composers can be particularly vulnerable, because a lot of times you have to submit scores to things, and you may have not been paid to write that score. So there's also kind of an imbalance in some of the practices in our industry about what you're expected to ask for. I am mindful of time, and there's one piece which we haven't talked about, which is the final piece of giving, which is stewardship, which is really just a fancy way of saying, like, remember to thank people. And everybody's kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering if anyone else has, you know, really unique or fun ways that they have thanked their donors after they've made a gift, or kind of how you continue thanking donors, even if it's not tied to a gift, but just making them still feel kind of that warm and fuzzy connection.
I'll jump in. One of the ways, I mean, I always send a thank you note, and yet, just like Bonnie suggested, I'm really big on handwritten thank you notes, even though my handwriting really looks scary and illegible, but I still do it. And always make sure that thank you is the most legible part of the letter. But I always, you know, I always do that. But I also feel like it's really important to, I mean, as we've been saying this whole time, to maintain a continued relationship with people. And when people have given to one of my projects, particularly any of my solo albums, I've always made a point of updating them on the progress of the album after it's released and as it's nearing release. I mean, I try and send them as many updates as possible, partly as a continued thank you, but also partly as a reminder that, as we've been saying about people being collaborators, these people are all co-executive producers with me on these things. They are the people that made it happen. And so as a result, I want them to share in its success, and I want them to share in every single milestone that any project continues to enjoy throughout its evolution. I mean, I know that it feels like once you drop an album, it's done and, you know, we're finished, but it actually has a much longer journey than that, because people continue to enjoy it. It gets reviews. If you're really lucky, it gets nominated for a Grammy or something like that. And every single time one of those things happens, I always make sure to try to reach out to people and just touch in and update them on what's going on. And during this pandemic, I've kind of upped that to just sort of, in general, keep people who have come across my path in those ways, just through a general newsletter, by saying, hey, this is what's going on. And, you know, I
like to think of that as sharing wins, so that, you know, we do that as an organization sometimes. If there's an individual who's done something great, we then say, you know, we're celebrating them, but also we're thanking you because you helped us support them and now they've done this really great thing. So it's still kind of, you know, recognizing that you didn't do anything completely on your own and that you're letting them kind of share in that win with you. Dafnis, I think maybe you were going to say something, but you were on mute.
Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, in my case, we do the same thing as Nick just mentioned. You know, keep kind of updating them as we receive reviews, and or even an email to ask them what is the tracks that you like best from the album. You know, the inclusive part of it, right? Or you know, when we make extra stuff, let's say that we make postcards, or from the we send the notes with it, and thinking of you, we keep the relationship like you will do like a relationship. It's a relationship. And I just think that in the overall of it, um, the most important thing is to let them feel that what you did and what they risk as helping you out, it has for example, in my previous project we made a big band, which we like to say that we want to make this elephant fly, and that was kind of became make the elephant fly was the kind of the title we put for the project. And we send them notes, the elephant is flying, here is a nice review, and things like that. And try to keep it very humble and very let them know how much we appreciate what's, and also acknowledging them when a few of them, and they come to the performance. I acknowledge them in the concert. I acknowledge them, and I go back and talk, and even before, after, it's just it's a relationship. It's a very interesting relationship, because at the end of the run, when you think about it, they don't have to do that, right? They don't have to, and they doing it because they see a quality in you and in your art that resonates with the qualities that they have in their hearts or in their minds, in the imagination. So that's the part that needs to kind of sticking between the two of or whichever that person is, right? Whoever that person is. So I just think that's acknowledging, and obviously in the records, we put executive producer, since that's what executive producer means.
Yeah. And I think something to also keep in mind is that different people have different things that excite them as far as what they like to get in return. So some people really do like having their name acknowledged. You should always ask, because some people prefer to remain anonymous. Mm-hmm. Bonnie and Somi, we have a few more minutes left. Is there anything else about stewardship and thanking people that you would like to add?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess an example of a way, if something is, sometimes there are very simple, I think we've kind of touched the idea of letter writing or just small things. And I think that for me, if I go somewhere that is related to the work that they funded, I oftentimes will try to give some sort of travel gift, like some kind of memento, depending on the level of whatever people have donated. Because I think that's also to be considered. You can decide, as there are these different tiers. And I think you can decide, do you want to actually purchase a gift? And I think it's also important to build that into your budget, an idea of like, if you do want to have these other things to kind of give people. I mean, I think even when people are fundraising to make an album, make sure you've included the shipping, all the other little details that you also need to do to thank everybody, because that's also a cost. So I would say, yeah, I think everything's already been covered in that regard, in terms of like personalized notes and keeping them abreast of the project. And an example I could just give is I would buy little things. If it was like somebody funded a project in, let's say, South Africa, then depending on the level, let me get them some really beautiful item that's from that place to share with them. And I think they appreciate that kind of thoughtfulness.
Yeah. Yeah, the only thing that I would add is, and this can be part of the through line through everything too, is that you have your donors, your friends, your investors, that they know each other. Any way that you can create that experience for them, because it might be that they met a new friend, and how did they do it? Oh, I was supporting Somi's project, and I met these really great people. They want to be, they want to be connected. So I think that's another thing to think of artist as connector as well.
That's great. Yeah, and I think someone put in the chat that they could send a recipe, and I think that's also connecting with people not just on the art, but like what other things that are interesting. I think I've connected with people about favorite foods or favorite artists who are painters rather than musicians or something like that, and that can be a kind of thing that you connect on that you might have in common, and then also kind of continues. So it doesn't have to always be 100% your art. That's definitely the asset you want to leverage the most. But you can also just like think about what you're interested in as a person, and it could be poetry, it could be comics. There's a board member who she creates her own little comics, and I asked her to send me, add me to her list. So now I have a little comic from her every day, and every couple of weeks I might be prompted to respond, and it's something that I get joy out of, and it's really easy to respond to her. And so, any way that you can kind of be personally connected and know what that person is doing from week to week, I think is a great way. I think we've answered all the questions, and we kind of got through all of the topics that I had wanted to cover. So we're just about at 75 minutes. So I want to thank everyone for being with us on this Monday afternoon, especially after what I feel was a very exhausting and tumultuous week. Yeah, thank you for sharing your experience and your advice. And if anyone has other questions that we didn't get to answer, feel free to write to us, and we'll be sharing some other information after the fact with everybody who signed up. So with that, I will say thank you and have a great afternoon, evening, depending on where you are.
Thank you. The same to you, and very nice to meet you, many of you, and wish you all the best.
You. Thank you so much. It's great to chat.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.